This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, good. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for accommodating the earlier time. Actually, 12:30 is our lunch and learn time, but during the winter months when we had mincha at 12:35, we pushed it off till 1 o'clock. But regularly until we go back to daylight savings time, sometime next November, hopefully well past the pandemic, then we will be having our lunch and learn regularly at 12:30 as we're doing it today. Ayin tachan ayin, an eye for an eye, is, pun intended, a much maligned pasuk, a much maligned verse, and people will often point to that as, oh, so you see how brutal and how violent the Old Testament is, and it's the rabbis who came back with apologetics, and they're the ones who corrected it, and they changed it, they altered it to make it only monetary payment. But really, the Torah wanted it to be a true eye for an eye. This person knocked out that one's eye, and the Hammurabi Code actually does involve that this physical damage would be inflicted on the perpetrator as punishment for that which he did to the other person. And in Sharia law, I believe, this is I believe this is applied in a literal manner. I mean, we know that in Saudi Arabia, the hand is chopped off if a person is caught stealing, and other such things. That is not, and I will seek today to prove to you on a number of levels that the Torah never meant physically an eye for an eye. And actually, when we look at the sources, we'll see it never actually said to remove an eye for someone else's eye, right? So we'll have to look at the context. And so often when the Torah or the Nevi'im are misquoted and misunderstood, it is because things are taken either out of context or not properly viewed within the context of what the Torah says or the Nevi'im are saying in a looking at the full paragraph, at the full order of events, at the topics that are being discussed. Okay? Now, of course, and remind me if I forget to do this because it's not in the notes, of course, then the question is begging to be asked and answered. Okay, fair enough, Rabbi, if hopefully I have convinced you, right? But then the question will be, okay, so why does it say it in such a manner that it can be misunderstood, misinterpreted? And that's an excellent question for which we have excellent answers. So let us begin over here. Okay, and okay, the way I'm doing this, I can't see it so well, but I will sort that out. Okay, so let's start with, there are two places in the Torah where we have this classic ayin tachat, ayin, literally an eye, tachat, right, for an eye beneath an eye. Let us see the context first of all. Okay, if we'll look down a little bit over here. So it's on verse 24 where we have that classic ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye, shein tachat shein, a tooth for a tooth, yad tachat yad, a hand for a hand, regel tachat ragel, a foot for a foot. Kviya tachat kviya, a burn for a burn. Petza tachat patza, a wound for a wound. Chabura tachat chabura, a bruise for a bruise. Okay, if you're just looking at those two verses, it seems to be very, very clear, an eye for an eye. But let's look at the context over here. Verse 18. People are fighting. Men are fighting. And one man hits his friend be'even o be'egrof, with a stone, with a fist. Intentional or non-intentional, my friends? What is being discussed over here? This is intentional. Two men are fighting, and one strikes his fellow, the other with a stone or a fist, but does not die. Is confined to bed. Verse 19. If he'll get up and walk out about outside on his support, on his own, then the assailant should be cleared of any sort of manslaughter charge. The guy lived. However, rak shivto yitain v'rapo yirapeh. However, he has to give payment for his shifto, his workman's compensation, for his enforced idleness, for his missing work, v'rapo yirapeh, and he also has to provide for his cure. So what do we see clearly? Context over here. When you hurt someone deliberately, what is the repercussion? Monetary payment. Okay, is that very clear? Deliberate accosting of someone else, monetary payment. Okay, 20 and 21 is talking about when a person hurts a slave. Let's go to so 18 to 21 is dealing with intentional damage, and as long as no life was forfeited, the repercussion, the punishment, the result of physical damage to someone else when it's intentional is payment. And also I want to acknowledge Rabbi Gil's student who put together all of these sources and ideas, and I'm building on from him. Let's go to verse 22. And should men quarrel and hit a pregnant woman? Okay, they're quarreling and they hit a pregnant woman. Is that intentional or unintentional? This is unintentional. And she miscarries. But there is no fatality. Actually, this is where we see that the Torah does not support what I believe is the Catholic view that a fetus, that abortion would be tantamount to murder, because we see very clearly over here, if she miscarries, there's no fatality. He shall surely be punished, right? But he'll have to be punished. What sort of punishment over here? Kasher yushat alav bala ish, according to the demands of the wife, of the husband of the wife, he shall have to give v'natan bifli lim. He will give it according to what the judges will order. So we see clearly over here, when there was damage done to her, damage done to the fetus, right? Even the loss of a fetus, what does he have to do? V'natan. He has to give, he has to pay. Verse 23. V'im asoni here. Oh, that's something else. If there is a fatality, meaning that the woman died, then you should give a life for a life. And even over there is a machloket, there is a debate. If a person meant to kill one person, meant to hurt someone else, and unintentionally killed someone else, as in the case over here of this pregnant woman, is there a death penalty for that or not? Okay, but that's not the issue of today. So what do we see so very clearly so far from the context? If a person accosts someone else, and there is no capital case, meaning there is no loss of life. So we saw in a deliberate case, what is the punishment? Monetary. In a deliberate case, that was going back to verses 18, 19 over there. In a deliberate case, it's monetary payment. Now over here we're talking about 22, 23 is the case of a man quarreling, fighting, and hitting a pregnant woman. Non-deliberate, unintentional. And here it says an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot. So from the context, it makes no sense at all to say that when it's deliberate, we said back in 1819, verses 18 and 19, when it's deliberate, what happens? Payment. When it's accidental, we're going to maim him? No, of course, what it means is the value of an eye needs to be paid for that eye. We need to assess the value. We already very clearly framed 1819, deliberate damage, monetary payment. Verse 22, non-deliberate, accidental damage. Benatan Biflin is going to give, he'll need to give according to the judge's orders. That's money. Now we are clarifying. How do we assess? How do we assess the value? And one of the last things we'll do is see the Mishnah, which unpacks all of this, meaning that if a person does accost someone else, there are 5 different payments that need to be ascertained and paid. And that's what we're going to learn from these psukim. An eye for an eye. The value, we already clearly established. Deliberate payment. 1819. Non-deliberate. 22. Payment. 24, 25. An eye for an eye. The value of an eye must be paid if you knocked out that person's eye. A tooth for a tooth. A hand for a hand. A foot for a foot. Meaning, what is the hand of that person? If the person is a teacher, hand for everyone has a tremendous value, but it has one level of value. If the person's a tennis player, if the person is a surgeon, then clearly that hand is going to have a very different value. So it lets us know an eye for an eye. If one person is basically blind or legally blind but can see some light, so knocking out that person's eye will have a certain value. If the person has keen vision, then it'll have a different value. So from the context, we are very clearly dealing with monetary payments. And therefore, we need to assess the value of that eye for an eye, the value of a tooth for that tooth, of a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, a burn for a burn. Interesting. A burn, there might just be tsa'ar. There's no loss of limb, but there will be tsa'ar. There will be pain. There might be workman's compensation. There might be doctor's bills. So therefore, the value of that burden is introducing another concept that the Mishnah will mention, that one of the 5 payments is tsar, is the pain that was endured. And the Gemara will work through how do we ascertain all of these levels of payment. A wound for a wound, a bruise for a bruise. So when we don't just look at verse 24, oh, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, ayin tachat ayin, shein tachat shein. If you just look at that with this tunnel vision, yeah, a person will mistakenly say the Torah mandates that the brutal Torah mandates knocking out the eye of the person who knocked out someone else's eye, knocking out his tooth. But from the context, we see clearly, even in deliberate damage, it's monetary payment. And we already introduced, so of course, non-deliberate is going to be monetary payment. And we already introduced non-deliberate, verse 22. 23 was their fatality, but 22 was no fatality, just damage, non-deliberate. And we already introduced there, according to the judge's orders, he has to give, he has to pay. And therefore, 24 and 25 is letting us know how that payment is ascertained, how that is determined. So if you look over here at the order, verses 18, 19, as we said, intentional damage. And the Torah says clearly monetary punishment. It said over there, and with no ambiguity, right, that he needs to pay. Right? Rak shivto yitain v'rapo yirapeh. Verses 20, 21, that's intentional damage to slaves. Verses 22 to 25 is accidental damage. And it's not explicit what the punishment is, though it said clearly by paying according to the judges back in 22. 26, 27 continues with accidental damage to slaves. So as we said, it makes no sense contextually, logically and contextually, it makes no sense to say that when you deliberately damage someone, there it's payment. But if it's accidental, then we're going to maim you in the same way, to the same degree that you maimed someone else. Now, the Torah in Vayikra, again, has these psukim, and that's in Vayikra 24:17. There we say, 17, the ish, tinake. Yes, Ruti, please.
I have a question about the pregnant woman. I thought that the fetus is alive after 40 days, and we said that it's not a murder, that the man hit the woman, and if the fetus died, it's not a murder. But actually, like if he's alive after 40 days, then he's dead, and the person intentionally hit her, and the fetus died, even if the mom didn't. Isn't he deserve a punishment too?
Yes, but it's not considered murder. It's not considered murder. Okay, you're right.
He just have to pay
After 40 days. Okay, you bring up a good point, and let me explain it a little further. Okay, after 40 days, in regard to certain halachot, it's considered to be a living being, in that it will affect, if the woman miscarries, it affects her laws. Must she bring a korban, not bring a korban, sacrifice? That's the 40 days. But we have tremendous respect for this potential life. And therefore, halachically, we would only allow there to be an abortion in situations where it's a life for a life or it's a non-viable life, the way that this embryo is developing, it's non-viable for living, right? We are very, very careful, but it's not murder. It's not considered to be murder. That we see clearly from the Torah, right? She lost the baby.
So if a woman is having an abortion, just that because she couldn't have the baby grown, and after 40 days the baby is considering alive, it doesn't consider that she, like the baby, her baby, she murdered her own baby.
It's not considered to be a halachic murder. It's not murder. Again, we place tremendous value on life and on potential life. And also keep in mind that even if I hurt someone else and I pay them, I still have this heavenly account and this bein adam l'chavero account of having caused this person all this pain. I will still need mechila, forgiveness, and I still have my heavenly account. So it's not to say that the money takes care of it, and I could walk around, deciding I want to hurt somebody, and then I pay, and then I'm fine. No, but there is this monetary payment, and certainly in the case of a wanton abortion, certainly in such a case there is a heavenly calculation that is involved. But we, the Beit Din down here, does not judge that as murder. And therefore, just like when you knock out an eye, right? So you pay, but Nebuch, this person now doesn't have an eye. Wow. Right? There's a heavenly accounting on that. But what more can you do? What more can you do besides monetary compensation? That does not completely exonerate the person, but that's what the Beit Din, the earthly court, Jewish court, can do. And beyond that, we have our judge, our Dayan in the heavens, who everything is emet, true, tzedek, just, and everything is accounted for. But there's we have limitations as human beings, and as a human court, what can we accomplish? What can we do? And we can't bring back the eye, we can't bring back the baby, but we can make it as good as we can, but with all of those limitations. Okay, and once again, I don't see everybody. So if you want to say something and you're raising a hand and I'm not acknowledging, feel free to unmute and speak up, because I don't see everybody. Once I start sharing my screen, I only see a few people, a few boxes. Okay, in Vayikra we have a very similar scheme. Verse 17, the ish kiyake kol nefesh adam. If a person smites the nefesh of a person, mot yumat, the person will die. Umake nefesh behema, yishal mena. And if you smite the soul of an animal, you'll have to pay. Nefesh tachat nefesh. Fascinating. Here it's explicit. We use a soul for a soul. Nefesh tachat nefesh, same exact wording. Ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye, a soul for a soul. But we just said the person's got to pay. Right? You kill an animal, you don't die for killing an animal. What does nefesh tachat nefesh mean? The value of that life that you took away, you'll have to pay in place of that life, of that animal. No one would dream to say nefesh tachat nefesh, that it means you're going to lose your life. We just said yishal mena. We just said you'll have to pay. Right? So nefesh, see, the English already took care of it for us, but it's important to know the Hebrew. And one who slays an animal shall pay for it the value of a life for the life he took. But actually, the words are nefesh tachat nefesh, a soul for a soul, exactly like an eye for an eye. But no one would dream to say it means over here that I have to pay for the animal and get killed. Wait, when I kill a person, I don't have to pay, I just get killed. For an animal, I have to pay and get killed? Of course not. No one would say you lose a human life for the death of an animal. So nefesh tachat nefesh means the value of that life of that animal, I have to compensate for the life of that to the owner. Meaning, right? If it's a racehorse, if it's secretariat, right? If it's a prize-winning racehorse, that has a lot more value than a hamster. No matter how much this person might love their hamster. So it's got to be nefesh tachat nefesh. The value of that soul, of that animal life, needs to be paid in place of that life that was taken. The same exact way as ayin tachat ayin. Well, let's go a little further. 19. And a man who inflicts an injury, the ishkitain mumba amito, when a person causes a mum against his friend, a blemish, kasher asa keni asa lo. As he did, that's what will be done. Meaning, sever tachat shever. We just said nefesh tachat nefesh above in the context. What did that mean? The value of the life needs to be paid for that life. So to over here, shever, the value of that break, tachat shever, the fracture for an action. Ayin tachat ayin. Here we go again. It's got to be the value of an eye in place of the eye, and the shane, and the tooth for the tooth. Kasha yitain mumbadam, kain yinatain bo. And here the Gemara points out, when a blemish is put onto a person, kain yinatain bo. Yinatain, notain means to give. So too shall be literally inflicted upon him, but yinatain, I underline that it means payment, means giving, something that can be given. So we just clearly showed by the case of the behema, by the animal, that it does not mean he's forfeiting his life, but rather it means he'll pay the value of his life in place of that life. He'll pay the value, same words, nefesh tachat nefesh, ayin tachat ayin, soul for a soul, eye for an eye, shane tachat shane, tooth for a tooth. Again, the question is begging to be asked, and we will of course deal with it. So why did the Torah write it in such a way? And we will come to that. So contextually, both in Shmot, where we saw that we dealt with deliberate damage to a person, monetary payment, then of course what follows when we're talking about the non-deliberate 22, and it talks about payment there. So certainly 24, 25 is continuing with that. And you'll also see in Vayikra, we have nefesh tachat nefesh by the animal, and that means clearly the value of the nefesh. So too, when it comes over here. Now let's look at the word tachat, right? In place of. Let's look at the language. Let's look at texts and other texts, and let's look at logic. Okay. Bereshit. Yeshev na avdecha tachat hanar eved. Let your servant stay instead of the boy as a slave to my Lord. Vanar ya'al imechav. And let the lad go back with his brothers. Who is speaking over here, my friends? Who's offering himself as a slave in place of one of his brothers?
Judah.
Judah is. Thank you very
Yehuda.
much. Yehuda, Judah, is offering himself to Yosef, at that point, unbeknownst that this is their brother Yosef. So he's offering himself to this viceroy of Egypt instead of Binyamin. Let your servants stay tachat hana'ar, in place of the lad. Tachat hana'ar. What's happening over here? Joseph, the viceroy, says he stole the cup. We found the stolen goblet by him. He's therefore deserving to stay as a slave. You want to take him away. You want to say he shouldn't be a slave. Well, then I, the viceroy of Egypt, I'm sustaining a loss. What does Yehuda propose? I will be there in place of Binyamin. Meaning, the loss that you have sustained, I will replace that loss. Tachat means in place, literally under, instead of, in place of. That's what tachat means, in place of. When a king becomes a king, tachat, in place of his father, he's assuming the position of the father. It is in place of. So clearly taking out the eye of the perpetrator, unless we're talking about a transplant, which I don't think anyone argues the Torah says is talking about that, then clearly we're not talking about taking out, because that the eye of the perpetrator, that will not be in place of. What can be in place of? Well, you've sustained a loss. Let me replace that loss as best as we humanly can. That's not replaced by this person losing his eye. It is replaced as well as we can replace it by monetarily compensating someone for the loss that they endured. So we see tachat means replacing, not my getting hurt because of what happened to you, but Yehuda says, I will replace the loss of you not having Binyamin as a slave. I will replace that loss by I will step in tachat, beneath him, in his stead, in his place, and serve as a slave to you, Viceroy of Egypt. Ayin, tachat ayin, you've got to give something that, to the best of our ability, will be in place of that which was taken away. So we see the context, we see the term tachat, what that actually means elsewhere. And now let's look, there's another pasuk in Devarim, which says, Lo tichel kofel nevesh rotzeach asher hu, asher hu rasha lamut, right? Kimot yumat. You cannot take kofar. Kofar is a monetary payment. You can't take a monetary payment for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death. Rather, he shall be put to death. If the person actually killed someone, then there is no monetary payment that will be accepted in place of the capital punishment. 32, you should not accept ransom of one who has fled to his city of refuge, allowed to return to live in the land before the Kohen has died. That's another issue. Again, manslaughter, but it was non-intentional. Then the person goes to what's called the Ir Miklat, the city of refuge. He must remain there until the death of the Kohen. And the pasuk tells us in 32, he can't buy his way out of there. He can't give a ransom payment to allow him to go back home out of that city of refuge before the death of the Kohen. So we saw before that once there is death, there's no payment. There's capital punishment. Now, if even for damaging there wasn't payment, then why would the Torah need to tell me if the guy who knocked out the other guy's eye, he can't pay his way out? He's got to lose his eye. So then why would I need the Torah to tell me that if he killed someone, he can't pay his way out? Of course he can't pay his way out. Where does payment come from? Whenever there's damage, there's no payment. So if there's death, there's no payment. But rather, clearly, the psukim before were talking about monetary payment when there is a loss of limb. Oh, okay. If that's the case, then I might have mistakenly assumed that when it comes to a murder, there's capital punishment, but perhaps there's a way also that a person can ransom himself out from that capital punishment. Just like he pays his way for loss of limb, I might have thought he could pay his way for loss of life. The Torah says no. But if you want to tell me that for loss of limb, there is no payment, there's loss of limb as a result, then there's no need for the Torah to tell me that you can't buy your way out of a death sentence. Now, continuing, right, we saw above Vayikra 24:17-20. Verse 22 says, Mishpat echad, one judgment. Yeh lachem kager ke'ezrach yeh. One law for everyone, whether it's a convert, whether it's a born Jew, one law applies throughout. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am Hashem your God. Now, one law applies. That also shows that it can't be. It can't be literally taking out the eye of the person. And if a blind man knocks out someone else's eye, so then it's not one law. A person with no eyes knocks out someone else's eye. That's not one law. Furthermore, right? Once you take out this guy's eye, who knows what's going to result from that? It's never going to be even. What, they have the same exact prescription or non-prescription? They have the same exact acuity? They have the same exact eye color? I mean, how is it ever going to be the same? How is it ever going to be a true mishpat? Therefore, like I said, it is all talking about monetary payment. The Vilna Gaon, and to those that I sent the source sheet earlier to, again, if anybody would like me to send you the source sheet before the class, let me know. I sent to a bunch of people, very easy to add other names to the list. So if you'd like it, let me know. Those that I sent it, I apologize, I added this in afterwards. The Vilna Gaon, the genius of Vilna, with his typical ingenuity, points out something fascinating. Ayin tachat ayin. He says, hint alluded to in this is monetary payment. What does tachat mean? Literally under. So he says, oh, if you want to know what you pay for an ayin, for an eye, look at what is tachat ayin. Look at the letters that are beneath the letters of ayin. Which letter comes after the letter ayin? Samach ayin pei. Which letter comes beneath The letter Yud, after the letter Yud, Chaf. Which letter comes after Nun? What is Tachat? What is beneath a Nun? Samach. Pei, Chaf, Samach. Unscramble those letters. What does it spell? Chaf, Samach, Pei. What does it spell? Kesef. What does Kesef mean? Money. So the Vilna Gaon ingeniously points out that if you look at the letters that are ayin, tachat ayin, look at the letters that are beneath the letters of the word ayin, which means I, but it's spelled ayin, yud, nun. The letters are pei, chaf, samech. I enjoy doing unscrambles, and there are unscrambling fans over here. Unscramble it, and you have kesef. You have money. Let's take a look at the Gemara, and then with this larger screen, I can't show you both the Hebrew and the English. Okay, I guess I can show you part of it and keep moving it. The Mishnah says, "Hachovel b'chaveiro." This is the Torah Shabbal Peh. This is the Talmud. A person who damages his friend, chayav alav mishum chamisha dvarim. There are 5 different categories of payment, which we have to ascertain how much he owes. Some of them might be 0, but there are 5 categories we need to look at. Nezek, the actual damage done, meaning the diminishing of the person's value. Tsar, the pain. Ripoy, the medical bills. Shevet, the loss of wages. Uboshet, and the embarrassment, the humiliation that he might have suffered. The nezek, Kate, and then we work through each of these. Nezek, the damage, simet eino katad yado shivat raglo, right? The eye, the hand, the foot. We view him as if he is a slave being sold on the market. And how much has the value gone down? Tsar, the pain. He burned him with a spit, with a hot metal, or with a masmer, or with a hot nail. Even on his nail, right? On his fingernail, where it's not causing any lasting damage that's going to cause any diminishing of his value. It's not making a wound. We assess how much would a person pay to not have to go through that. Ripoy, that's the doctor's bills, right? And shevet, we assess, right, the loss of wages that he has sustained. The Gemara says, Amai, why? Ayin, tachat ayin amarachmana, ema ayin mamish. Perhaps it means literally an eye. And the Gemara says, Lo salkadaitcha. Don't even entertain that thought. Titania, and the Gemara works through a number of proofs, a number of ideas, some of which I've shared with you so far. So again, it is very clear from the context, from the word that's used, from other halachot that are stated. It is perfectly clear, at least to me, I've done a good job then to you also, that the Torah never meant to knock out a person's eye. It's not that we have this brutal Torah and along came the rabbis and they softened it up a little bit. The Torah never meant, from the context, from the language, from other laws, it's clear. Very good. So then why did it present it in such a way? And that really goes back to a point that I made before, addressing Ruti's point. Had it said, you pay, so I would have said, okay, no big deal. I'm feeling frustrated today. I'm really feeling really angry. You know what's really going to help me calm down? I'm going to punch someone random in the face. I'm going to feel such a release of all this tension when I do that. No problem. I'll pay him. I'll pay him. When you think about it, ayin tachat ayin. You knocked out this person's eye. How do you put a value on that? Who's going to accept $1 million and be blind for the rest of their life? Who would accept $10 million to be blind for the rest of their life? You can't put a price on it. We have to. But Hashem's letting you know, the Torah is letting you know. You know what you really deserve? If you could go and knock out someone's eye, you don't appreciate what it's like that you've put this person through. The only way that you could fully appreciate what you've put this person through for the rest of their life is for you to be in that predicament. Chew on that. Chew on that slowly. Digest that slowly. That's really what could or should happen to you. We're not going to do that. It's got to be tacha. There's got to be a replacement. Like Yehuda was a replacement for Binyamin. You can never replace it. You got to do as much as you can. But you have to know you can never replace it. So don't think I paid the guy, now I'm fine. Beg that person for forgiveness. You have forever altered their life. And no money that you give can make it worthwhile. We've got to do the best we can. But there is no price tag that justifies what this person has gone through and will suffer with for the rest of their life. Ayin, tachat, ayin. You have to chew on that. You have to digest that. That's
Rabbi,
really,
can I ask a
yes,
question?
please.
Just playing devil's advocate now. Why couldn't it not be a combination of taking the person's eye out and they pay a fine, i.e. the criminal damage and the civil damage? You know, like, for example, the OJ case, they took a civil case, which they won, and he had to pay. They lost the criminal case. He won the criminal case, OJ Simpson. But there were two aspects, the criminal aspect and the torts, the damages aspect.
Okay.
Could it not be understood that there's both here?
Okay, from an American law concept, perhaps. Excellent point, Julian. Thank you. But actually, from a Torah law, we have a teaching of Kedei Rishato, that a person only gets one punishment for an infraction. Even if you kill someone, and in the course of killing that person, there was also material damage that was caused, you get the stricter of the punishments. You don't get double. You don't get both. Even in the case of murder, a person does not get lashes and have to pay. A person does not get a death penalty and has to pay. According to the Torah, there's only one punishment that one gets for any sort of infraction. So that would preclude what you are suggesting. Again, according to other laws, other systems perhaps, but that can't be what the Torah is saying, because according to the Torah system, there's no double jeopardy, right? You don't get punished on two fronts, right? It's death, lashes, monetary. Those are, and it's one or the other. Yeah. Okay. So again, this is how the Rambam explains. The Rambam explains that a person needs to realize that this is what should happen, but that's how serious, how overwhelming the act that you've done is. how that will forever change the person's life. And the Torah presents it in such a graphic, it presents its monetary payment. Because again, contextually, the terms that are used, it's clear that it's monetary payment. It presents, it couches, it's speaking of this monetary payment in a manner that lets us realize just how overwhelmingly devastating this act that has been done, just how devastating that is. That, my friends, is the ayin tachat ayin. Never, never, never meant maiming that person, but it is doing our best to compensate that which can never truly be compensated. And therefore, doing your best to compensate, as the Gemara says, mammon, monetary payment, that which can never truly be compensated. Ayin tachat ayin. Only if a person would lose their own eye would they have a sense of the devastation that their actions have caused to another human being. Okay, my friends, Yasher Koach, everybody. We'll call it over here. And again, from now on, we're on at 12:30. The next couple of weeks, and then after that, we'll be dealing with topics relating to Purim, which is, we read the Megillah 2 weeks from tonight. And then we'll be dealing with topics relating to Passover, to Pesach, coming up 4 weeks after Purim. And then after that, I will go back. There were some suggestions for a different series, so I will go back to a series. Someone suggested a series about the Jewish view on Mashiach, on Messiah, right, as opposed to the view promoted by some other religions. So that could be a very interesting series. And once again, if there are any topics, whether it's a single or a series, please feel free to email me, and I will see if I can, if it makes sense, I will do my best to accommodate. Okay, everybody. A good day, everybody. Shalom, shalom, everybody.
Thank you. Good man. Also.
Thank you.
Shabbat
You're very
shalom.
welcome. Bye-bye, everybody.